question, it's a political question. That's exactly what's going on in New York with the Attorney General and Letitia James just going after Donald Trump because he's a political opponent, rather than the justice system and law enforcement actually looking at the law and trying to enforce it. And so this raises a couple of other points, and I think your article is just so well put. And I agree with you that Andy McCarthy is a very well-respected attorney. His analysis is usually very good. I mean, he's one of the people that I read everything from, right? But yeah, he really is. But this also raises the important aspect that for people who are listening, who always ask, where should I go to, find what's really going on, find, things that aren't biased? Well, the byline is always important in a piece, because when you look at what Andy McCarthy writes, if it's something that is on a Supreme Court discussion, I'm going to actually take that with a much different view than what he analyzes and what he writes about Donald Trump, just knowing his own partisan perspective, and also with the background of a former prosecutor versus someone like Alan Dershowitz. And so, how do you tend to read some of these pieces when you look at someone like an Andy McCarthy that's writing in National Review versus, obvious bias from the New York Times versus some of these other opinions from people that are known Trump supporters?
Well, like yourself, I have an automatic skepticism when I see a source like New York Times, Washington Post, and the lefty, the lefty websites like Politico and Dispatch and so on. I saw an absolute shocker in Dispatch this morning up on Real Clear Politics that just took for granted that 2020 was a perfectly uncontroversial, pristine election. You couldn't possibly raise a complaint about it, and just assumed all sorts of negative things about Trump. I mean, if that's where they start from, there's not much point reading it. But occasionally there's surprises, I must say. Occasionally all of those publications or sites do produce things that are quite fair. I'm not looking for a whitewash of anybody. I'm not a whitewasher of Trump myself, but I like you. I like to see not the assumption of negative things, but if they are going to be entered, I want them entered in a way that makes them plausible, not just name calling to start off with. But you look at the quality of the sites. If you look at the aggregators, like Real Clear Politics, of course there are quite a few of them, but they generally try and balance things a bit. So you have a pro and an anti on most issues and most personalities, and there are sites that are generally fairly reliable and authors that are fairly reliable, like a man like Victor Davis Hanson, a very distinguished historian. He's a friend of mine. I have a podcast with him and Bill Bennett, but he's always very fair in what he does and what he says, and he always reasons it out for you. But I think it's like anything else. It's sort of caveat emptor. You've got to be careful of the source before you take the content seriously. But even I saw, to my astonishment, about 3 weeks ago, a piece from the Washington Post, and I forget who wrote it, but it was an opinion piece, not a contributor, not, I think, a staff person, and it was very fair and very reasonable, and so I don't discard these things in advance just because of where they're published, but any discerning reader has to be careful. I mean, it's always been to some degree like this, but not in my recollection as constantly and severely, stridently one-sided as the media usually are now. And there's no farther you need to go to discover why public respect for the media has sunk to lows that are completely unheard of, as far as I know, since polling on this issue has been taken. I mean, when I was a young person, I hate to date myself, but people listened carefully to what prominent commentators like Walter Lippmann said. And they didn't always agree with him, obviously, but they listened to it carefully, read it carefully, read all of the major outlets, even ones they didn't agree with often, like the New York Times and Time and Newsweek magazine, read them all carefully, and the whole process of public opinion formation was in a relatively few hands who didn't, in general, abuse their position. But now we have, after the 2016 election, you will recall that the editor of the New York Times said that it was no longer the function of the Times to publish all the news. It was the function of the Times to try and lead the readers in the direction they thought the country should be going. Well, that's not why people buy the New York Times. Not buying it to be led, they're buying it to be impartially informed. And that's not usually what happens on political matters.
And that's so very well articulated, and probably not a lot of my listeners know that my background and major was actually in technical journalism. And so before going to law school, I went through getting my bachelor's degree in journalism, and I can remember sitting there in the news and editorial classes with my professors articulating the distinctions and the differences between, do you want to be an opinion and commentary writer, or do you want to be a news reporter? There's also, public relations, there are different things, but then also going through the history of yellow journalism and things that are just so obviously propagandized that it's a shift from traditional and respectful journalism. And I agree with you that it's always been that way to an extent, but the rise of the political fervor that has just taken over the country, that we are so polarized that people tend to now not even look at a piece or read a piece or have their opinion swayed at all if there is a publication that has an opinion or has even facts that come out that are contrary to their own preconceived idea. So it's almost like we're just looking for confirmation bias in our news sources instead of saying, let me approach this wanting my opinion to be informed so that I can have, therefore, an informed opinion. And so it's frustrating when people who are good analysts otherwise then tend to shade their opinion just based on political connections. And of course, we've had that to a certain extent with people who work for a campaign, for example, and of course, they're always going to postulate things in the best interest of their candidate. Lawyers do the same thing for their clients, but that's always been presumed and assumed, but journalists are supposed to act differently. And so when we take that whole concept and apply it to the argument that I think you brilliantly explain in your piece, there really is no argument for what the FBI is doing and the Department of Justice is doing to Donald Trump as a legal question, not a political question. And after you've kind of gone through, surmising Andy McCarthy's position and certainly pointing out, some of those issues, going down to the meat of the argument, I think that you brilliantly explain that what is there that they're actually indicting him for? Because whether the documents are classified or not is not actually an issue. Whether he had and possessed documents from his presidency is not an issue. And we're talking about it being a legal issue, not a political issue.
Yeah, and as far as I can see, they're reduced to this spurious allegation that he's been recklessly subjecting confidential information, classified information, to the danger of getting into wrong hands. I mean, this is a bit rich given that, and to be fair, even Andy implied this, it's a bit rich given that Hillary Clinton dumped all kinds of classified material straight into the laps of the Kremlin and whoever else wanted it, in a way that was compounded by the destruction of 33,000 emails that were under subpoena, and nothing happened. So that does, as Andy acknowledges, raise a question about the contrast in treatment of the two people. But it seems to me, Jenna, that there are two fact situations that are very prevalent right now that we will eventually want to get to the bottom of and find out how they happened. And one is the absolutely irrational, extreme form of anti-Trumpism, the so-called Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, all manner of highly intelligent people whom we both know and would be well known to and are well regarded by your listeners, speak very intelligently and civilly on all manner of subjects. And when the name Trump comes up, a trap door opens in their foreheads and a cuckoo bird flies out, and they start babbling absolute nonsense, malicious, venomous, vituperative nonsense. And this is a very peculiar thing. I mean, there have been lots of politicians, political leaders, and other people, very prominent personalities in the past who've been very controversial. I think of Mr. Nixon, for example, whom I knew quite well in his last 5 years, and things had settled down by then. But there was a time when he excited a great deal of passion, but not like this, and not people just completely inventing allegations to level against him. And secondly, we have this extraordinary arrangement, which I did refer to in that piece as a kind of silent, sacred, spontaneous oath. The entire national political media, even relatively pro-Trump parts of it, like the News Corporation titles, maybe not the Post, but the Wall Street Journal and Fox News, they all sign on to this idea that there's no possible question about the authenticity of the result of the 2020 election. Now, everybody who looks into it at all knows there were millions of harvested ballots. A person with the knowledge of grade 3 arithmetic can see that if 50,000 votes flipped in Pennsylvania and any two of Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin, Trump would have won in the Electoral College. There are millions of harvested ballots out there where it was impossible to, and in any case, in most cases, no attempt to verify the vote cast was actually cast by a real voter or the alleged voter. No verification of that. And you can't just sit there and say there's no doubt about that election. It's one of those elections, and there have been a few of them in American history, where we don't know who really won if the votes had been counted fairly. I mean, we know who won the election. There's nothing to be done about it now. But to sit here 2 years later, en bloc, en masse, the entire media of the country saying that it's just a matter of fairness of elections, and anyone who questions the validity of that result is disputing the fairness of elections. It is a very unhealthy, unnatural, and it's a unique phenomenon. This is nonsense. It's just nonsense. And it's malignant nonsense. It's dangerous.
Or in my case, have the Attorney Board of Regulations, attempt to come after me and my bar license just because I questioned it on behalf of my then client. And it's not just me. I mean, they have come after and Democrat-led political action committees and other just supposedly, well-meaning activists have come after over 110 of the lawyers that were involved in some of these challenges, asserting absolutely nothing other than they questioned the outcome of the election and also had legal theories. And if that's the basis upon which to sanction attorneys and have adverse action against them, is that they represented a client or they questioned whether or not the administration of an election was fair and constitutional and had legal theories, well, then no one could ever practice law again. That would never be fair. Or to say that, well, later on, these cases were all kicked out based on standing. Well, how often does that happen to so many other cases? And we'll take a break right there and be right back with more with my friend Lord Conrad Black after the break here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
Are you able to stand steadfast in this post-Christian world? Join Frank Turek, Gary Habermas, Hugh Ross, Richard Howe, and more than 40 other speakers for Southern Evangelical Seminary's 29th Annual Steadfast National Conference. No matter where you are on your faith journey, you will leave this event better equipped to penetrate the culture with the gospel and defend the truthfulness of Christianity. It all happens October 13th and 14th at First Baptist Church in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Register now at ses.edu/national conference.
The world around us is constantly challenging the way we think. That's why we need a constant source of information that's based on the unchanging Word of God. I'm Jeff Chambly, and I invite you to join me for The Stand Radio, a weekly program that highlights the latest trends in culture, faith, and family. You'll hear insightful interviews with a biblical worldview application. The Stand Radio, Saturdays at 4 p.m. and Sundays at 8 p.m. Central on American Family Radio.
What is the source of America's greatness? My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. Alexis de Tocqueville, a 19th century French political thinker and philosopher, had this exact same question. On the heels of the French Revolution, he came to America in 1831 to investigate America's ascendancy. In doing so, he found that America's greatness did not lie in her economic system, it did not lie in her banking system, nor did it lie in her educational system. He found America's pulpits aflamed with righteousness was the source of America's greatness. He opined that America is great because she is good, but when America ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. Let us pray for restoration of the flame of righteousness in our pulpits.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
In churches, and a lot of churches today, the issue of identity is sort of like the big elephant in the room. It's in the news, but it's not in the church. So if it's in society, it needs to be something the churches are addressing.
In His Image, delighting in God's plan for gender and sexuality, is now available for church screenings and events.
Every person in America needs to see this.
And all pastors need to show this to the church, get their people informed. If the church and Jesus isn't the answer, where's the world going?
We want the message of the film to touch as many hearts and lives as possible, and we'd love to join with you to bring the film to your community. So let's say you have a small group or your church, or we've even been bringing the film into some prisons. We want to partner with you. So what we'll do is we'll send you a special kit, and it's completely free, and it'll just have some extra resources to help you promote your event.
To find out more about how to host an event, go to inhisimage.movie and click on the Host an Event tab. That's inhisimage.movie. Speaking truth with love. This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Welcome back, and here is the second half of my interview with Lord Conrad Black. You know, as you talk about in the article, quote, the airtight sacred oath of secrecy that the entire American national political media have spontaneously taken, that the 2020 was an unquestionably fair presidential election, is an astounding and possibly unprecedented act of mass denial of the obvious by a huge group of well-informed people, many of them of upright character and high intelligence, and perhaps someday it will adequately be explained. And I thought that paragraph in particular was so good, because what do you think it would take, Conrad, for us to actually be able to have these types of challenges in courts when elections, I mean, election law isn't something new that just was manufactured in 2020, that no one has ever challenged the result of an election ever before. But we're seeing that in mass, people are just being forced to accept this premise that this was unquestionably the most free and fair election ever. So what needs to change?
I guess it could happen two ways. This whole era could subside, it could just fall behind us, and in another time, say in 10 years or 20 years, if challengers arose, they'd be treated fairly and seriously. Kind of spontaneous resurrection of the respect for the institutions and the fairness that I think most people, most citizens, most people in the country want and would support, regardless of which party they might be in, usually. But the other way, I suppose, and this is what is being struggled for at the moment, is the defeat of the current administration when it seeks re-election, and the serious re-examination of these issues by, it would be hoped, a nonpartisan, highly respected panel. This will take some I mean, I think you'd have to make it a respected judges. You have to be careful with that. I mean, Merrick Garland was a respected judge until we all got a good look at him as Attorney General.
Isn't that amazing?
I mean, I actually disagreed, not that my views count for anything, but with Senator McConnell not bringing his nomination to the Supreme Court to a vote. I thought he had a perfect right to vote against it, but I thought he should have allowed it to be brought to a vote. And I mean, Chief Justice Marshall was the Chief Justice for 34 years, and he was put up by President John Adams after he'd been defeated by Jefferson and before Jefferson's inauguration. And he was a political enemy in Virginia of Jefferson. But it went ahead, and Jefferson didn't complain about it. But that, you know, that's a sideshow. I mean, I think if the Republicans win, and instead of just returning the hammer and tongs animosity that they've received from the Democrats, I mean, the manner in which the Democrats have abused their majority in both houses of the Congress to torment the Republicans is a complete outrage. And this fatuous January 6th committee where the Speaker, Pelosi, kicked the nominated Republicans off is an example of it. I mean, the chief Republican being someone who lost her contest for renomination in her district, the entire state of Wyoming, by 40%. I mean, that's representing the Republican Party. I mean, it's just a mockery. But if the Republicans do a proper job, a fair job of getting to the bottom of what happened, I think everyone would be grateful for it.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of well-meaning Americans, and not these people who just are so saturated in the game of politicking, but Americans who really want to see our nation thriving and may have different political opinions on policy and politics that can have thriving, robust, well-meaning debate. That's always been the case in America, that we've had a diversity of opinions, but it seems like our government is so incredibly politicized that I mean, there's so many times, honestly, that, you know, I'm here in DC and I'm so discouraged being just, you know, a well-meaning lawyer from Colorado that had an opportunity to come and work for the greatest president of my lifetime, and it's been an honor. But to see the absolute dank corruption that exists in Washington, it's really discouraging. Do you think
Just
that
shocking. I mean, there was always some of it, but it's absolutely shocking.